A very good morning to our viewers and participants, and welcome to the online discussion Two Islands, One Future, Ireland, the United Kingdom and the European Union. This event is jointly organized by European Movement Ireland and the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. My name is Matthias Bahner. I am the representative of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation for the UK and Ireland. This is the first in a three-series of events planned and carried out together with the European Movement Ireland in 2021. Our goal is to offer a range of different perspectives on the challenges, the opportunities and relationships that impact Ireland, the United Kingdom and the European Union as well. And I'm very grateful that we start today's discussion with an outstanding lineup on our panel. I'm pleased to welcome our three distinguished speakers, starting with Leo Varadkar, Taoiseach, Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment. Katja Leikert, Member of the Bundestag, the German Parliament, and Vice President of the CDU-CSU Parliamentary Group. And from the UK, Sir David Lidington, Chair of the Conservative European Forum and former Minister for the Cabinet Office. Thank you very much for joining us. And of course, a very good morning also to you, Noel O'Connell, CEO of the European Movement Ireland, who will again chair today's discussion. Allow me to mention that since our last event in November, Noel was elected as Vice President of the European Movement International. So our warmest congratulations, Noel. We as Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, a political foundation committed to European values and the unification of Europe, are very happy to cooperate with the European movement, focusing on mutual challenges, friendship and cooperation in Europe. Not only on this occasion today, but in the future and in the past. For example, in 2017, we already jointly hosted an all-Ireland forum in Dublin with colleagues from across the UK, including Scotland and Northern Ireland. Noel, many thanks again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for that very warm welcome. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Céad míle fáilte, guten Tag und herzlich willkommen, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. I'm delighted to welcome you to this very important and indeed very timely joint Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung European Movement Ireland joint event, and delighted, Matthias, to be continuing the excellent collaboration with you and all your CAS colleagues. My name is Noel O'Connell and I'm the CEO of European Movement Ireland, and we're absolutely thrilled to see such a distinguished audience joining us today for our virtually sold out event. I think we've over 300 people joining us from across Europe, with audiences particularly strong in Germany, the UK and Ireland, aptly reflecting perhaps the title and the theme of today's event. As Matthias mentioned, this is the first in a three-part series of collaborations that we are jointly engaging on during 2021. Some indeed will be focusing on Ireland, the UK and wider EU relations post-Brexit. And we will also be looking at the potential cooperation on the EU-UK relationship and what part and what role Ireland can play in facilitating that. And with a new conference on the future of Europe on the horizon, something that we in European Movement Ireland will be working very actively on, we will also be discussing how Brexit and the future of Europe is going to change and what the dynamics of future EU integration efforts hold. To set the scene, I think it is a great honour to have such an incredibly distinguished panel of speakers to share their views and perspectives, and a little bit like the Eurovision, joining us from Berlin, Buckinghamshire and Dublin. So I hope, ladies and gentlemen, we've all had our coffees this morning, as we have a fantastic session and webinar in store on each of these topics. And I see the Taoiseach has his coffee to hand, as does Katja. Fantastic. David, I'm not sure, my screen has disappeared. You're all set as well. Fantastic. So in terms of the proceedings, by way of introduction, Each of our illustrious speakers will have the opportunity to provide opening remarks. And after that, we will then have plenty time for an interactive Q&A. And I've already given our panel of speakers a heads up that we have lots of questions coming in. So please do, ladies and gentlemen, I would encourage you to send in your questions to events@europeanmovement.ie, or those of you active online, get in touch with us via social media using the hashtag EMICAS, as my colleagues will be monitoring our channels and they'll feed those questions to me directly. And I think we've already got 12 lined up, so no shortage of questions for our distinguished panel of speakers. So without further ado, it's my honour to introduce our first speaker this morning, An Tánaiste Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Leo Varadkar TD. The Tánaiste, of course, previously served as Taoiseach. He was elected in June 2017, and in that role, he led Ireland's negotiations on Brexit at a crucial time. He has been a TD, a Member of Parliament here in Ireland since 2007. He has also served as Minister for Transport, Tourism, Sport, Minister for Health and Minister for Social Protection. And in June 2020, he became Tánaiste, or Deputy Prime Minister, and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment. He is also the leader of Fine Gael, and he is also a very distinguished and esteemed and highly regarded honorary president of European Movement Ireland in his role as Taoiseach. So, Tánaiste, it is my honour to hand the virtual floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning from government buildings here in Dublin. First of all, Noel, thanks very much for the introduction and for the invitation to speak here today in what is the first of a three-part series on Ireland, the UK and EU relations post-Brexit. And hello to everyone who's tuning in from Germany, from Britain, from Ireland, and indeed from everywhere else around the world. As many of you will be aware, my party, Fine Gael, is linked with the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung and our think tank, the Collins Institute, and the Adenauer-Stiftung are part of the Martens Centre network, all part of the broader EPP family. And we will be helping to shape this discussion on the future of Europe in the months ahead, and we'll do so as part of the new conference on the future of Europe. The Irish people have always been and always will remain pro-European. But it's not a relationship that has always been plain sailing. We've had lots of positives, the enormous solidarity in relation to Brexit. We've been huge beneficiaries, and we still are, of the single market and also structural funds. And we're founder members of the euro, our single currency, which has brought us price stability and low interest rates for decades now. But there have been less positive experiences as well. Certainly the EU, IMF, ECB Troika process and experience strained relations and Irish attitudes towards the European Union. And there have been referendum defeats as well, often linked to concerns about diminution of sovereignty or threats to our military neutrality. And it's also a relationship which is one that's changing and changing profoundly at the moment. First of all, we're now a net contributor, and that will inevitably change the way we look at things. It hasn't yet, but politics and history tells us that it will. There's also a bit of a shift towards protectionism and confidence creep at European level, and that will concern some. And of course, the impact of Brexit is going to be profound and will forever change the web of relationships across these islands and in Europe. As a country and as a society, we're deeply grateful for the solidarity that we received from our EU neighbours, including Germany and Chancellor Merkel in particular, throughout the Brexit negotiating period. And I think it highlighted to us in the best way possible how sharing national sovereignty makes us stronger in our engagement with third countries in the wider world. It also demonstrates that in the European Union, the interests of small countries do matter. Of course, big countries have more influence and more power, but they don't make all the decisions alone. And I think that was a particularly important message from Brexit. The idea of shared sovereignty was one of the big attractions for Ireland in joining the European Union, providing a means for us to break free from our historic dependence on our larger neighbour, the United Kingdom. Joining the European Union, or the EEC as it was at the time, allowed us to be part of something bigger while remaining an independent state with our own identity. And I think for many in Britain, the experience might have been the reverse. Joining the EC caused them to pull away from the old empire and the Commonwealth and to join something that to them perhaps felt smaller and less familiar. But as we all know in practice, despite our enormous differences, Ireland allied itself with the United Kingdom on most of the everyday issues that the European Union dealt with. As a free trade, pro-enterprise and pro-competition champion, we intended to adopt similar positions and similar opt-outs to the UK. The United Kingdom, like Ireland, looks west to America and is Atlanticist in its outlook, as well as to Europe. And I do think that the European Union without the United Kingdom is a different place and is a weaker and poorer place without Britain as a member. But that is their decision, and we respect it. So Ireland is now actively seeking to build new alliances to fill that gap and to advance our interests. As Taoiseach, on occasion, I was invited to attend the meetings of the Nordic and Baltic Prime Ministers, and we have much in common with those countries, as well as the Benelux countries and places further afield, like Cyprus and Malta. And now as Minister for Trade, I meet with a group of like-minded ministers to discuss how we should position ourselves on major trade issues, and that group includes Germany. We're currently reviewing the EU's trade policy, and I'm always making the case for free trade, a multilateral rules-based order, and the need to link sustainability and social standards to trade. And I am doing all that I can to resist covert protectionism, whether it comes from member states or from the Commission itself. I'm also highlighting the importance of rebuilding the transatlantic relationship, the biggest and most economically significant political and security partnership in the world. And I believe that Ireland can act as a bridge between the EU and America, especially under the Biden administration, given his and his team's close contacts with Ireland. The Atlantic alliance between Europe and America is the keystone of global security and prosperity, and I want it to be restored to good health. But I think the priorities that I've outlined are also priorities for the United Kingdom, and I think it would be foolish for us to see the UK as a competitor and to discount its role as an ally. Prime Minister Johnson outlined his ambition for a global Britain in the integrated review he published last month, and our own Global Ireland programme, which I launched back in 2018, shares much of the same ambition. To quote the political declaration on the future of the EU-UK relationship, the Union and the United Kingdom are determined to work together to safeguard the rules-based international order, the rule of law and promotion of democracy, and high standards of free and fair trade and workers' rights, consumer and environmental protection, and cooperation against internal and external threats to their values and interests. I think that's a very powerful statement, and we have a responsibility to fulfill that joint ambition, to repair our relationships, and to achieve our common interests and values in a rapidly changing world, where economic and political influence is shifting south and east. I always want to approach any discussion about the European Union with a positive attitude, to talk much more about what we can achieve rather than what we want to block or resist. The policy challenges that we face are increasingly global, and they cannot be met by nation states acting alone. Our response to this pandemic is a case in point. So are the other major issues of our time: climate change, migration, international terrorism, and the regulation of major companies. These can only be dealt with as Europe united. Ideally, I'd like us to partner with the UK on as many of these global issues as is possible. But I'm not naive to think that things can carry on just as they used to. But politically, it does make sense to have a common approach on as many of these issues as possible. Ireland and the United Kingdom share a common geography, culture and values. The UK is our closest neighbour, where many of our friends and family live, and where many of us will go to work and study. The United Kingdom is not a foreign country. Yes, the relationship is strained, but it can be repaired. The Good Friday Agreement, signed 23 years ago last weekend, had the foresight to provide in it mechanisms to strengthen the relationship between our islands. It's not just about cross-community power sharing in Northern Ireland, Strand 1. Under Strand 2, the North-South Ministerial Council and the North-South bodies ensure closer cooperation and joint action between North and South. Under Strand 3, the British-Irish Council covers matters of mutual interest, bringing together representatives from 8 jurisdictions, including Guernsey, the Isle of Man and Jersey. And the BIIGC provides a formal structure for enhanced relations between the two sovereign governments. At the moment, we're exploring each other's ideas as to how we can enhance the UK-Irish dialogue, looking at models, for example, like the Nordic Council, a model which Taoiseach has spoken about. Whatever form it takes, we're agreed that there needs to be more engagement between the UK and Irish governments, and we hope that the British government feels the same way. We appreciate that while we see Britain as our larger and nearest neighbour and our biggest market, that isn't true in reverse. This engagement that used to happen between British and Irish ministers would happen as a matter of course at the fringes of EU Council meetings in Brussels and Luxembourg, and in the daily interactions of officials on the corridors of the EU institutions. So there's a big gap there. Not just because of the pandemic, we're not seeing each other or talking or interacting as much as we used to before. And I think we need to correct that. Brexit as a policy was always going to be disruptive, and it was always going to have a disproportionate impact on the island of Ireland. But what we've seen on the streets of Northern Ireland in recent weeks really does concern us all. What politicians say matters, so I'll keep my words brief and to the point and careful. I want to say that we understand the genuinely held concerns of the people of the Protestant, Unionist and Loyalist community who fear divergence from the rest of the UK. For our part, we never wanted any trade barriers between North and South, between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, or between Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland. That's why we were against Brexit. It's why we advocated the United Kingdom staying in the single market and/or the customs union. It's why, when that was not possible, we negotiated a single customs territory or the backstop. And it was the rejection of all of these potential solutions that gave rise to the protocol. And now we just want to make it work. And so the Irish government will continue to advocate for flexibility, for common sense, and for generosity in terms of solutions from London, from Dublin, and from Brussels. Any disruption to trade, human movement, or animal movement between Northern Ireland and Great Britain should be minimised. But we cannot support anything that would undermine the integrity of the single market or Ireland's place in it. And of course, no change can be made to an EU-UK treaty unilaterally. It can only be made by agreement in Brussels and London, and ideally in Dublin and Belfast too. So unilateral action isn't going to work, and that's why we need agreed solutions. And I believe the way forward is through dialogue, through normal democratic politics, through the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, the EU-UK Joint Committee, and specialised committees under the agreed framework. The protocol was hard won. It is carefully constructed, and it is designed to ensure that the disruption for Northern Ireland is the least it could be, while preserving the delicate balance that the Good Friday Agreement established. It provides Northern Ireland companies with unfettered access to both the EU single market and the UK internal market. And as Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, I'd really like to see politicians and stakeholders in Northern Ireland exploiting this unique advantage that they now have. For our part, the Irish government doesn't want to see any disruption to the Northern Ireland economy, to daily life north of the border, or to the flow of goods between it and Great Britain. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the protocol isn't just about trade. It's also about protecting the rights of citizens in Northern Ireland. And it is up to the Northern Ireland Assembly to decide whether it wants to disapply the protocol, and no majority of any form at present exists for that. The majority of parties and politicians in Northern Ireland want to make the protocol work too. And I don't think that the next Assembly elections are likely to change that reality, but of course that remains to be seen. Before I finish up, I just want to thank the European movement and CAS for organising this series. I think it's timely that as we begin a new chapter for Europe and consider our collective future as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe, Ireland favours a policy-focused, citizen-first approach to the conference. And in a time like this, our citizens want us to respond to the issues that they care about most, rather than focus on institutional issues and mechanisms. While we do not seek treaty change, we do, of course, not rule it out. And we're currently preparing a programme of inclusive events which will ensure a broad representative range of perspectives are canvassed. And like today's event, we want to facilitate as much discussion and as much interaction as possible. So less of me and more of you, and thanks again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to your comments and questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tánaiste, for that outstanding keynote address and really setting the bar extremely high and for this morning's event. And we are very grateful to you taking the time out of your busy schedule as we have some appreciation of how hectic and busy you are. So thank you very much, Tánaiste. And now from Dublin to a sunny Berlin, I hope. Katja, it is as sunny in Berlin today as it was yesterday when we did our tech run. But we are delighted to be joined following the Tánaiste's keynote address by Dr. Katja Leichhardt, who is a CDU member of the German Bundestag, and Katja is the deputy chair of the CDU-CSU parliamentary group in the Bundestag for European Affairs, Human Rights and Humanitarian Aid. And we are very grateful to her for joining us today from Berlin. So Katja, I would like to invite you to deliver your keynote address.
Yeah, thank you very much, Noelle, also to Matthias. And it's quite a sunny day here in Berlin today. So let's get started. It's a pleasure being able to discuss UK-Irish EU future with Tánaiste Leo Varadkar and Sarah Liddington, who have both been shaping UK-Irish EU relations for a long time. UK, Ireland and Europe all find themselves at a critical junction, and I will admit that most politicians, of course, think that their tenures are very important and always at a critical junction, but I think it's true. So first, the situation in Northern Ireland. It has been made very clear to all of us that the Northern Ireland conflict is only dormant. Lots of people on the continent had forgotten about this, and I'm very glad that the EU Commission is not among them and has always paid attention to preserve the Good Friday Agreement. Good Friday has been a huge success in many fields, but not in solving the core of the conflict. And politics in Stormont have remained difficult, not a bloody one, but still dysfunctional. As things are now, the palpable effects of Brexit have been rather small for Northern Ireland, and yet it was enough to lit the fuse in people's heads. We will need to find a way towards a new normal in Northern Ireland. Brexit leaves us no other choice here. And I appreciate that the EU Commission Vice President Šefčovič takes this very seriously and shows willingness to continue playing a constructive role. And I also agree with the Commission. The Northern Ireland Protocol is binding and must remain the basis for all negotiations. Nevertheless, there is no point insisting on something that doesn't work on the ground. So I think we need tweaks, maybe even bigger changes on the protocol. And this time, the Northern Irish, the DUP, Sinn Féin and the centrists need a bigger say, because it's them who will bear the consequences. And Leo just talked about that we need agreed solutions. So I agree on this. Second, EU-UK relations. I'm convinced that EU-UK relations will normalize once the dust from Brexit will have settled down, because we simply need each other, and I also think we appreciate each other, and time will show that more and more. For example, one good sign in my view is the revamp of foreign and defense policy of the UK government that we all have read, of course, the 114 pages of Global Britain in a Competitive Age. Some experts criticized the lack of EU and Europe in the paper, but to me, the EU was innate in most of the topics when it comes to China, Russia, or cyber policy. Kudos to the UK for engaging the big challenges of our time on a global scale. It is completely obvious to me that these topics need the UK and EU work together. This is my understanding that the ones in charge in the FCDO and the MOD agree with this. And I can assure you that this view prevails here in Germany and in the ministries and the Bundestag as well. The UK remains a partner for all global challenges, a challenging, of course, but still trustworthy one. Here in Berlin, just a couple of days ago, US Secretary of Defense Austin visited Europe and made very clear that the US administration counts on a deep transatlantic cooperation with all Europe. The Trump illusions of a special relationship seem to have waned. And it's also my belief that UK relations with single EU countries besides Germany will become stronger, but only on certain topics. For example, the Baltics will be eager to cooperate on Russia, the Eastern Europeans in defense questions, but this is natural and also, I think, positive and no threat to the EU, which will remain the umbrella for the UK-Europe relations. Third, and to conclude my statement, I would like to speak about the conference on the future of Europe. This conference is for us an opportunity here in Europe. It's a good thing, listening to the public, wanting change. We are also open for structural progress. The EU understood that there are topics that need a bigger stage than Parliament or Council. I would like to see open and frank discussions about security and border issues, EU financial resources, the cleavage between economy and ecology. And I would also like to see discussions about the EU's institutions and how to enlarge their legitimacy. I would like to see a bigger role, for example, for the European Parliament, especially vis-à-vis the Commission. The Commission is an executive with vast responsibilities, and as a parliamentarian, I think it needs more control, of course, but also political support than the Council can give. Obviously, common foreign and defense policy need to work better. I'm not sure if depriving small member states of their veto is the right path, but something needs to be done here. Ankara, Moscow, and Beijing are doing their best to show us that on a daily basis. And science and environmental policy are fields that clearly belong to the European sphere too. They need to be dealt with there and not by member states. This is also a prime example of the need for more EU cooperation with provinces or Länder, as we call them in Germany. Federalism should be at Europe's core. Last point, banking and capital mobility need to be harmonized. The euro has been a success story, but we haven't unleashed its full potential yet. There's a lot of debate on this in my parliamentary group as well, but there's very little reason not to make it easier for German companies to get access to Italian capital, for example. I will stop here. Thanks to the CAS and European movement for bringing us together today, this morning, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katja, and thank you for those important remarks and sharing the German perspective, not only on Irish UK EU relations, but the wider future of Europe. So thank you very much, Katja. And I think now we go, David, from Berlin to Buckinghamshire. Our final speaker, and by no means last, but by no means least, it's the Right Honourable Sir David Lidington. We're delighted to be joined by him today. Former Cabinet Office Minister, Sir David served in the House of Commons with great distinction for nearly 28 years, including more than 9 years as a minister in the governments led by former Prime Ministers David Cameron and Theresa May. And he held the roles of Minister for Europe at the Foreign Office, Leader of the House of Commons, Justice Secretary, and Minister for the Cabinet Office, in which role he was also Deputy to the then Prime Minister, Theresa May. David, it is our great pleasure to invite you to deliver your keynote address. Thank you, David.
Noel, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the invitation, first of all, and it's a real pleasure to be on the platform with the Tornister, whom I met and worked with in previous ministerial incarnations when he was Taoiseach, and also to be on the platform with Katja. My starting point is that I think that the world today is a less friendly place for liberal democracies than it has been at any time for more than 30 years. Today, Russia has massed troops on its border with Ukraine. It continues to occupy by armed force parts of Ukraine and of Georgia. It has been seeking to subvert elections in various countries in the Western Balkans. And Russia is using economic, information, and cyber leverage, warfare, however you want to describe it, to test Western resolve. China is asserting the superiority of its own system of government over that promoted by the West. China is flexing its military muscles in the South and East China Seas and on the Himalayan border with India. It stopped using the qualifying adjective peaceful when talking about its ambitions for reunification with Taiwan. China has openly set out a plan to achieve global supremacy by 2049, the centenary of the communist takeover, in all the key 21st century technologies, from new generation telecoms to synthetic biology to quantum computing and artificial intelligence. So the challenge there for the West, the democratic world, however we want to define it, is not about individual companies, a TikTok or a Huawei, but about whether in 10, 20 years' time, we can avoid becoming dependent upon Chinese technology and on Chinese suppliers, with the potential for political leverage that would give to Beijing. Third, we face the challenge of the climate emergency. Fourth, the continuing use by terrorists and serious and organized crime of the internet to organize, plan, and recruit. And fifth, the reality that millions of people, whether it's in British cities or Irish cities, German cities, American cities, around the developed world, are asking whether the democratic free enterprise order is actually delivering results for them. At a time when, particularly since the financial crash of 2008, people have seen living standards squeezed, employment become less secure, and the digital transformation of our economies is upending so many assumptions people have been able to live with about their family security through the provision of certain jobs and careers, and whether those will survive is now in question. And yet at this very moment, and of course what both Leo and Katja pointed out, what Brexit has done is to further divide the democratic world, and it has, in my view, weakened both the United Kingdom and the European Union as global players and influencers. And it's no secret I was opposed to Brexit, and I have never sort of retreated from that view that it was the wrong decision. But I have, from the first day after the results, accepted that though the outcome was narrow, it was decisive, and that the democratic mandate of the Leave vote had to be respected. It now, of course, is a done deal. It is a legal and constitutional fact. And I think part of the problem we face is that neither the UK nor the EU has until recently really given sufficient thought to what kind of long-term strategic relationship they each want with the other once the UK had finally left. Now, I do think, as Katja said, that the British government's integrated review, which is, I thought it was broadly speaking a very good analysis of the strategic challenges and opportunities facing my country. It actually offered a number of very constructive suggestions, sort of olive branches, or however you want to define them, to EU member states and to the European Union institutionally, though I think it's a fair comment to say that I think the Johnson government feels more comfortable instinctively with the idea of good bilateral relationships with European countries than it yet does to have strategic relationships institutionally with the European Union. And part of this is, as Katja said, that we're still in the immediate aftermath. You know, we've had an earthquake in our relationship, and we're still living through the aftershocks that follow that. But I agree that the common interests that the European democracies have and the common threats we face should drive us to find new ways in which to work together in the altered relationship that we now have post-Brexit. And I think that this should be on the basis of making the trade and cooperation agreement work better and finding ways incrementally to add to it as each side sees such a move as being in its mutual interests. So if I were looking at the EU side and asking what I wanted to see there, I would argue that the Commission should drop some of the hang-ups it has about police and criminal justice cooperation. I understand the sensitivity of some of the issues, particularly over data transfer in various European countries, but I have to say I would not like to be the minister of any country who had to stand up in their parliament and tell families who'd lost somebody to a terrorist attack that information had been available that might have prevented the crime, but that there were rules on access to databases and sharing information with other countries that meant that that information could not quickly be shared. If I look at the UK side, I think that there's an immediate challenge for Boris Johnson with his chairmanship approaching of the COP26 summit on the climate emergency later this year. And it seems to me, obviously, that the European Union is going to be a major player in that. He therefore needs a good relationship with the Commission and the Council Presidency about the European Union's position, and also to look at things like emissions trading schemes and carbon border adjustments, because it seems to me it would be crazy if we had UK and EU schemes that were completely incompatible with each other and just added to the trade frictions that are already there and are diminishing jobs and growth at a time when Britain and the EU need every job and investment we can get globally in order to address the challenge of the digital transformation and global competition. I think, too, that I would very much like to see the development of a strategic UK-EU relationship on foreign and security policy. And if you look at what Boris Johnson's actually done since coming to office on Iran, on climate, on Israel, Palestine, despite everything that Donald Trump was urging him to do, the Prime Minister has stuck very closely to what might be described as a mainstream European position. If you look at the Sahel, the Johnson government has actually sent more UK troops to assist the French-led peacekeeping operation against terrorism and extremism in that part of the world. So I think the practical substance of what's been going on makes me more optimistic that as time goes on, it may be possible, and should be possible certainly, to put together a constructive strategic partnership in a way that I think meets the interests of both sides in terms of the global threats that we face. As the integrated review itself says, the United Kingdom is a European power, but one which also has global interests and a global outlook. But the review says in terms that the great majority of the UK's effort on security policy is going to be devoted to the Euro-Atlantic area, and that the pivot, the tilt to the Indo-Pacific is going to be there too as part of our outlook on the world, but that the preponderance of our effort will continue to be in the Euro-Atlantic area. The UK-Ireland relationship, I think, is of particular importance. Our histories are intertwined. We don't just share many interests, but we also share a particular responsibility to support peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. And I think it's key, as Leo Varadkar said, that because British and Irish officials and ministers are not going to be meeting week after week in the margins of EU meetings, that we invent new ways in which to work together and to institutionalize that cooperation, so that the conversations are not simply squeezed out by the inevitable diary pressures that intrude upon governments in every nation. We need to understand each other's positions and each other's interests. And I think that such a new bilateral partnership should include regular summits. I think it should include joint ministerial meetings and the secondment of officials and security personnel between the UK and Ireland. If I turn briefly to the current crisis in Northern Ireland, of course, it's not just due to tensions over the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. There has been huge loyalist and unionist resentment at the decision by the prosecution service not to prosecute Sinn Féin grandees for their attendance at a mass funeral of a former IRA terrorist last year, which appeared to be in complete defiance of COVID rules against large gatherings. There is police action against organised crime, and there's no hiding the fact that organised crime is a key element in some of the loyalist organisations. And also there is the reality that in Belfast and other parts of Northern Ireland, that loyalist anger is in part an expression of that broader sense of disaffection and alienation that we see in poorer working class communities, as I've described, in cities throughout the developed world at the moment. In Northern Ireland's case, made worse because of the legacy of sectarianism that still persists in Northern Ireland, where we have a peace process, a political process. People don't want to go back to the 70s or 80s, but where there is not a genuinely shared society yet. But we can't avoid the fact that the protocol is a large element in the current stress and disorder. And my fear is that the protocol could become the defining issue of the Stormont election due in 2022, with people bitterly dividing on sectarian lines over whether or not they support the continuation of the protocol. And I think ending the current crisis will need compromises from both the British government and from the European Union, the Commission in particular. I think that the UK government does need to show, in both its words and its actions, that it stands by the protocol, which it, after all, negotiated, signed, and took into law, and campaigned and won a general election in support of. I think that it also involves accepting publicly that that protocol, that treaty, involves in some respects treating Northern Ireland differently from Great Britain. Although, as Leo pointed out, there are actually some amazing opportunities that the protocol gives to Northern Ireland business to pull in inward investment, saying to global companies, come here and you uniquely will, from us, from our territory, can sell into both the European single market and into the entire UK market. I think, too, it would be sensible for the UK to look at things like a veterinary treaty. New Zealand has one, after all, with the EU, so that you could reduce some of the friction arising on agri-food. But I think the EU too does need to move. Michel Barnier used to talk a lot about the de-dramatization of checks, inspections and controls, not having systematic controls at ports, but instead looking at checks, risk-based, taking place on the market or at the place of manufacture. I accept this is more difficult with the revised protocol because there's not a common rule book on either industrial goods or agri-food, but that de-dramatization principle, I think, is still part of the answer to the current crisis. And I would point out that in 2017 and 18, the Commission justified its insistence that the Irish border, unlike the UK's other borders with the EU, should be dealt with in the withdrawal agreement rather than in the subsequent negotiations over a trade and cooperation agreement on two grounds. Necessity, because peace in Northern Ireland was necessary and essential to the EU's core interests, and proportionality, that cross-border trade on the island of Ireland was insignificant in the context of EU external trade overall, and indeed of EU-UK trade overall, and that in similar fashion, because it was in insignificant proportion of the whole, the smuggling risk was relatively small in relation to that much bigger overall trade picture. And therefore it was proportionate too to treat the border on the island of Ireland in a different way from the other EU external borders with the United Kingdom. And I think that in the current context, reviving those two principles would be a very constructive step forward. Those principles, it seems to me, still apply. And so moves from both sides are going to be needed. And I very much hope that that is what arises out of the talks between David Frost and Maroš Šefčovič, and that we shall see things calm in Northern Ireland. It is profoundly in the interests of everybody that that does take place.
Thank you very much, David. And on that hopeful, optimistic note, I think we are certainly all in agreement on that. And thank you very much for sharing those incredibly valuable insights. Fantastic. What a superb opening remarks from all of our panel this morning. So thank you very much for that. And questions are coming in thick and fast. So what I might do is I might just go in terms of the questions and the rank order and the timing that they were submitted. And then I'll ask each of you to answer the questions directed to you. And if anyone wants to come in on any of those questions, if they wish to add to them, please don't hesitate to let me know. So our first question, and Tánaiste, I might start with you, and then Katia, I'll ask you to perhaps answer the same question as the Tánaiste. And it comes from Maeve McMahon of Euronews. And Maeve's question is, what do the panelists think of the European Parliament's decision to refuse to set a date to ratify the EU-UK trade and cooperation deal? They want to wait until London gives reassurances it will apply the deal, but the provisional arrangement runs out at the end of April, so time is running out. Tánaiste.
Yeah, I understand why the European Parliament has taken that view, and have been in touch with MEPs about this. Manfred Weber has been in touch with me about it, our own MEPs as well in the European Parliament. And essentially, what the Parliament is saying is that we have a withdrawal agreement. That withdrawal agreement includes the protocol in Ireland. It's legally binding international agreement. If it's not being implemented and honoured, how can we then be asked to ratify this next agreement, which is the trade and cooperation agreement? So, I understand the logic and the reasons and rationale behind the European Parliament doing what it's doing. And I think it puts maybe just a little bit more pressure on Vice President Šefčovič and also Sir David Frost to try and come out with a good outcome in the talks that are now underway. And I just think listening very carefully to what Sir David had to say earlier, and I think his script could have been mine in terms of our view as to where the landing zone for a practical solution is, and I think it is in that space. So hopefully it'll be possible to negotiate some arrangements that ensure that the UK fully owns and honours the protocol which they signed up to, but also requires realism and generosity and practicality and reduced officiousness from Brussels in terms of how things are done in practice and how they're interpreted. And I think if we can do that, I don't think ratification will be a problem at that point.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Katia.
Well, as a parliamentarian, I understand that Parliament is looking very closely on the process. I mean, Brexit was a bumpy ride up to here, and to make sure that UK really sticks to the agreement, I think it's good that the Parliament will check the situation and makes sure that their voices are heard here as well. So I think this refusal of setting a date is not a drama, and it's fair enough to take into account the concerns of parliamentarians. As we just discussed, it's really an important issue, and we want to make we want to take care that every that it's fully implemented, the withdrawal agreement.
Okay, thank you, Katja. Tánaiste, the next question I might turn to you as well, and it has come in from Catherine Preble, the UK and Ireland correspondent of Repertoire. And she's wondering that for the Tánaiste, you must be frustrated at the lack of interest and care given to Northern Ireland by the UK government. And it seems now clear the external intervention may be needed to solve this impasse. Who could help? I would suggest the obvious choice would be to get a US mediator to prevent the collapse of the Good Friday Agreement. What do you think, Tánaiste?
I hope I'm not incorrect in saying this, but I don't foresee the collapse of the Good Friday Agreement. I don't think we're anywhere near that point. There are enormous difficulties at the moment because of relations among the major parties in Northern Ireland and the wider issues that we're dealing with. But I really don't believe that we're going to be seeing the collapse of the institutions in the north or any of the other institutions for that matter. I always think intervention from outside can be helpful, and certainly in the past from the US it has been. But 23 years after the Good Friday Agreement, we shouldn't really need that. And I think what's really required now is a very close cooperation between the two sovereign governments, between the UK government and the Irish government. I know the UK government doesn't like to use this term, but we use the term co-guarantor, where both the Irish government and the British government are co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement. And when it goes off track and when there are difficulties, it's the two governments working together that are best placed to put things back on track. And that's always been the case when there have been problems in the past 23 years. And I think that's what's needed. And, Simon Coveney is in close contact with the Secretary of State. Prime Minister Johnson is in close contact with the Taoiseach spoke on in the last couple of days. There's no lack of disinterest there from any quarter, in my view. We just need to redouble our efforts.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Tánaiste. David, good to see you. I might turn to you for a couple of questions. So the questions now, David, for your good self. I'll first one in from John Peet in The Economist, and he is wondering as to whether you think that the UK government should choose to align with EU food and veterinary standards, as that would solve many of the problems over implementing the Northern Ireland Protocol. And if it keeps refusing to do so, why? And so I'll let you go with that one first.
Okay. Look, and apologies. I think something crashed over the internet. I'm about 3 miles. I live from 3 miles away from the Prime Minister's sort of country residence, official residence at Chequers, and every Prime Minister I've ever known complains about the rotten mobile and internet connections at Chequers, but nothing ever seems to change about it. I think John's perfectly good question. My answer is yes. It seems to me that alignment on agri-food, veterinary standards would solve a number of problems. It would ease significantly the friction over implementing the protocol, Northern Ireland and Great Britain trade. I think that it would also be what, frankly, the UK farming and food industry wants, because it would help more generally with the trade between the UK and the whole of the EU in agri-food. And there's no real consumer demand in the UK that I've noticed for any shift from current standards. If anything, the public pressure in the UK is always to tighten food safety and traceability standards. So I would support alignment. I think that the government's reluctance to go down that route stems from two things. I think first, I think that it is it's just part of the way they see and frame Brexit, is that it is about breaking free of EU rules and the interpretation by the European Court of what those rules mean, and therefore I think a reluctance to go back into any part of that. And I think secondly, they want to keep open the prospect that they might be able to negotiate a trade deal with another country or region of the world, which would be in some way incompatible with EU food standards legislation. Now, frankly, I think that those fears are exaggerated. President Biden's pretty clear that he's not interested in any big trade deals, certainly not in his first term. The New Zealand is a part of the Pacific trade agreement, and New Zealand has a veterinary treaty with the European Union. I could see if it was a dynamic alignment agreement, which is going further than New Zealand, more towards the Swiss model, then if the British government has worries about what that means for its application to join the Pacific Club, that might have a bearing on things. But that's my interpretation of what's happening.
Great, thanks, David. And I might just, while I have you unmuted, I might just go to the next question. Also, Katrine Preble, UK Ireland correspondent of Repertoire. Her second question, David, is to you, and she is asking you that many in the unionist community feel let down not only by the DUP but also by the British government. At the same time, they fear a border poll coming soon. Has the British government been too ignorant and careless regarding Northern Ireland after all? Sacking Julian Smith, who is well respected by both sides, has had real consequences. Why do you think that step was taken?
On the last point, I'd be wrong for me to sort of second guess the Prime Minister, and Julian is a good friend of mine. But I agree, he was a first-class Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. I think his departure was a loss to the government and a loss to Northern Ireland and to UK-Ireland relations as well. So I hope he will come back into government at some stage in the near future. On the broader issue, I think that there has been a reluctance in unionism, or much of unionism, to think through that the consequence of Brexit, which the majority, but not all unionists supported. The Ulster Unionist Party at the referendum was in favour of remaining, but that would have consequences for trade. That either there would have to be some sort of check, some sort of trade border north-south, or it would have to be east-west, or the UK would have to stay within the EU's single market and customs union, if you were to do with it with all such checks and frictions. And I think there's been a reluctance to make choices. my own preference, I won't hide it. I was Theresa May's number 2. My preference was for the backstop, as we agreed it then. But there's a limited point in sort of going over sort of historic choices that were made. In fairness to Boris Johnson, he's always been completely open about his opposition to the backstop. He stood in the Conservative leadership and then fought the general election on the basis of the package that the kind we now have. So there's a limited point in going back over old ground. I think there's a deeper problem here, though, which I think is that I do worry that in too much of Great Britain, people are not focused on Northern Ireland in the way that they need to be, and the particular tensions and problems to do with Northern Ireland. It's almost as there was a sigh of relief. People, the bombs and bullets stopped, so we don't have to think about this anymore. And I think that is a very big error. And I think that that in part explains where we are. I don't myself think that a border poll is inevitable, or that if one were called, that the outcome is inevitable. But I do think that unionism has to think strategically about how the case for the union is best made in a Northern Ireland where now you have roughly equal numbers of people who define themselves as British and as Irish, with between 12 and 20% of the Northern Ireland population sort of unaligned between them. And therefore, the union depends upon enough moderate nationalists, enough unaligned people continuing to think that that is either the best option available, or at least the least bad option available to them. Let sleeping dogs lie. And so I think unionism needs to think through how it makes the case for the union in those changed demographic circumstances.
Okay, thank you, David. And actually, Tánaiste, I turn to you following on the theme of that last question I posed to David. Our next question has come in, Tánaiste, from Michael Streck from Stern magazine. And he is wondering that, do you think that the end of partition in Ireland is just a matter of time, given the fact that demographic development, as David was alluding to there, in Northern Ireland is shifting towards the Catholic population and the level of discontent among young Protestants with the UK government?
I always have to be careful as to how to answer these questions, because, of course, the end of partition can mean very different things. And there are very different visions as to what reunification might look like. You know, for some people, it's a 32-county unitary state that is, very Irish and Gaelic and nationalist in character, and sees Britishness as foreign, and that's not a vision of reunification that I share. There's one that I believe in that I'll probably talk a little bit more about in future, which is a different idea as to what reunification might look at, and that is making sure that Ireland is a home and a warm house for everyone who calls it home, and using those Good Friday principles, a place in which people can be Irish or British or both, a rainbow nation, something quite different to what was envisaged actually in 1916, but one that might actually work better and command the support of the broadest range of people living on the island. But that does mean a lot of thought and a lot of people challenging their views and their own mindsets, and all of us, including me, having to do that. And that's why I think talk of a border poll now, or even setting a date for a border poll, is deeply unhelpful. You know, it is causing an increase in tensions. It is seen as threatening by the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community, and absent those proper conversations and that proper interaction about what reunification means and should look like, I think it's premature. But I think something that's what David said really is spot on. And actually, Gregory Campbell, the DUP MP, said much the same thing only a few weeks ago. There is no majority in Northern Ireland anymore. There are three minorities. one minority that identifies primarily as Irish, another that identifies primarily as British, and then a growing kind of middle ground of people who are, you know, British and Irish or Northern Irish, and we see that more and more among younger people. And I think the challenge for unionists, and I respect unionists, and they will always support the union. You know, there's no economic argument that's going to stop you being British or stop you being unionist any more than nationalists, you know, would cease to be nationalists for economic reasons. So unionists will always be unionists, and I think it's now incumbent on them to make the case, not just to their own community, but also to that middle ground and the nationalist community that the union is worth holding on to. And those of us who agree with reunification need to do the exact same thing in reverse and make the case to the Protestant unionist and loyalist community as to why this might work and how there could be an accommodation for you and for Britishness in this new scenario, and also to speak to that middle ground as well. But that's not really what's happening at the moment. The Good Friday Agreement is wonderful. It brought about peace in Northern Ireland, but it's a cold peace. You know, it's still people who go to different schools, worship in different churches, read different newspapers, play different sports, watch different television channels. It's a cold peace. And, you know, the violence that we see on either side of a peace wall says it all. It's a symbol of that. And what we've had as a result of the Good Friday Agreement is peace and power sharing, and that's been great. But it's a cold peace. There hasn't really been reconciliation. And that's what we should be focusing on, I think, rather than border polls and dates for unification.
Thank you. No, thank you, Taoiseach. And if I may, just on behalf of everyone, I very much appreciate all of your honesty and frankness. I'm reading out the questions as they are coming in the format they are written. So I very much appreciate all of your willingness to deal very honestly with everything that's being posed to you. Katja, I might turn to you in Berlin now. Our next question comes in from Sebastian Borcher, and he is the London correspondent of the Der Tagesspiegel, and apologies to Sebastian if I have massacred my German pronunciation of his publication. But his question is that during the Brexit negotiations, Ireland succeeded in putting the fate of Northern Ireland front and centre of the EU's negotiating stance. How much damage has Brussels done in January with its willingness to trigger Article 16, even though it was withdrawn within hours? Paradoxically, today the EU has more responsibility for Northern Ireland than before Brexit, but fewer people who really understand it. Who can fill the void?
Yeah, first of all, I think Leo and David already pointed out. Leo talked about a cold conflict. It was a frozen conflict for a time, and just to reassure everybody here, during the time of Brexit, it started in 2016 with a referendum. So we are for a long time now occupied with of focusing on this situation. I mean, it's the last conflict in Europe, maybe Cyprus, but within Europe. And I remember back 1994 when I was in Dublin, how it felt just to be there and see the closed streets and the cars, which looked all in a military kind of state. So we were happy to see the Good Friday Agreement, of course, in 1998, and we want to keep it as a success. So I think the Commission, to be frank as well, made a mistake here by invoking Article 16 back in January. But I also think that President von der Leyen and Vice President Šefčovič have high understanding of the situation in Northern Ireland. And I can only tell you here in my parliamentary group and with our Chancellor Angela Merkel, I mean, we always put a strong focus on the situation, because we know about the how fragile the situation still is, and would be good to have a peace plan. And I know it's easy to say, but would be of course good to see a reconciliation in society in Ireland. This is what we wish and hope for, and
Great. No.
I think government, we will see a solution there.
No,
I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Katja. Our next question is both for the Tánaiste and David, for you. So Tánaiste, I might go to you first, and it is from Sebastian Gerhold of the CDU-CSU Bundestag Fraction, and he is asking you both that the only way forward for Northern Ireland is economic progress. People need to see a benefit of the peace process, particularly the unionists who feel they have more to lose, i.e. the ties to the UK. The outlook for Northern Ireland could hardly be brighter with its unfettered access to the British economy and EU's common market. Why has it not been possible to convey this to the people of Northern Ireland? And where do you both see Northern Ireland's best business opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because the protocol does present enormous advantages for business, employment, and investment in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has unfettered access to both the UK labour market and the, well, I suppose less of the labour market, but they've unfettered access to the market for goods, if you like, both the UK's internal market and the EU single market. That's not something that any other territory has. So I think particularly in manufacturing and in those areas, there's huge opportunities for Northern Ireland if the politicians there can come together and if they can do their best to exploit it. But I suppose part of the difficulty with the protocol, and there are difficulties with the protocol, is that it isn't quite the best of both worlds that we had hoped for Northern Ireland, and perhaps the backstop would have been closer to that, but that's history now. And we have a Northern Ireland that is aligned to the European Union for the purposes of rules and regulations around goods, but to the UK for the purposes of rules and regulations around services. And that is an unusual scenario. But the advantage definitely is there, I think, in terms of goods and in terms of manufacturing and distribution, and that really needs to be promoted and needs to be exploited, and there can be economic benefits, I believe, from all of this. But they are best achieved if we can keep a close trading relationship and relative alignment between Britain and the EU. There are real risks if Britain continues to diverge from the European Union. That will cause increased problems for Northern Ireland, because the extent to which there are differences in checks and controls is relative to the extent to which the UK misaligns with the EU.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tánaiste. And we're just being advised, Tánaiste, that you have to leave due to a prior commitment. So we are going to extend our appreciation and our thanks very much to you. Very grateful to you taking the time out of your busy schedule, and we will see you again. Thank you, Tánaiste. And David, I might go, the Tánaiste is going to disappear from screen. Right. David, I might ask you to, the wonders of technology.
Absolutely.
David, did you want to,
yes,
what were your thoughts
yes,
on?
I think I'd make a number of points to Sebastian. First of all, I think it's a mistake to think that the tensions in Northern Ireland are going to be solved simply by economic growth and greater prosperity. There's no doubt that will help. And there has been, since the IRA ceasefires and then the Belfast Agreement, you have seen employment go up, living standards go up in Northern Ireland, a lot more both housing and industrial development there. It is very different from the place that it was, even 20 years ago. But this is at root a conflict about identity and nationality. And so it's not something capable of a purely economic solution. In terms of what needs to be done economically, I think that there needs to be an effort, as with any other part of the UK, to work to meet the challenge of global competition and digital technology. And that means improving infrastructure and improving skills so that people leave school, college, university, equipped and then adaptable to this digital world in which they're going to be trying to make careers. So there's some elements that will apply equally in Birmingham or Glasgow or Plymouth as in Belfast or Derry. I think that there's a different element in Northern Ireland, which is the link with the EU and the all-Ireland economy, and particularly if you look at Derry, Londonderry, which is a city within the UK, but with an economic hinterland that straddles the border. It's the whole of the northwest of the island of Ireland in both jurisdictions. And therefore, I think that's the sort of area which not just Unionist and Nationalist at Stormont should work together, but London and Dublin and Brussels, because of EU regional funding, need to be working with together as well. Because actually, the west, the northwest of Northern Ireland, is an area that's been on the periphery of everything. You know, from the periphery of the UK, the periphery of Northern Ireland, the periphery of the island of Ireland, the periphery of the EU, and so there's a good case for doing that. And things like the UK government's city deals, which are being rolled out for both Belfast and Derry, Londonderry, will help this sort of thing. I just add, Northern Ireland is overwhelmingly an SME economy. There are relatively few big businesses in Northern Ireland, and therefore friction on trade bears very, very heavily on Northern Ireland, more so than it might in some other parts of the UK because of the structure of the economy there. There are some really good businesses in Northern Ireland. There are good technology businesses in Northern Ireland. There are some good financial services business in Northern Ireland. There's some strong agri-food sector in Northern Ireland, so that there are good assets which can be built on further. Last point is that Katja talked about it being a cold peace. And you see this at Stormont in that, and it's an uncomfortable but necessary post-conflict arrangement, that there's an enforced coalition with parties who are not really partners. That it's almost a division of the spoils, and it's been very difficult for them to work together, particularly for the DUP and Sinn Féin to work together. And there's so much history and baggage tied up with this. And I think what the UK government, but then the Irish government, to the EU, the United States, through their different contacts with Northern Ireland politicians, just need to be trying to encourage Northern Ireland politicians to find ways of trying to get agreement on some of the outstanding issues. There is a misallocation of resources on things like education because there has not been cross-community agreement at Stormont to face up to the tough decisions about where schools need to expand and where other schools need to close, because the roles are falling, and you don't need the same number of institutions there, and infrastructure similarly, housing similarly, and yet these issues all need to be tackled, and they're within the competence of Stormont, not of Westminster now, if Northern Ireland is to generate the prosperity we all want to see.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. I know, absolutely. And Katja, I'm a question here for Maria. I might give you the last, our guest speaker from Berlin might have the last question. And Maria is wondering as to what do you see the role Germany will play in driving the EU agenda, and what impact will the upcoming German parliamentary elections have on this process?
Well, first of all, we have exciting days these days in my party. I don't know if everybody follows, but this is not a cold conflict. It's really a tough race at the moment. But this is only one side. What will Germany do? Of course, I mean, David just pointed it out, how important it will be to engage. David mentioned data cooperation, for example. It would be possible to explain people here in Europe why we didn't have information, and we rely heavily, Germany as well, on information, for example, from UK, also our American friends. So this is natural for us. And what is good? I mean, we of course, we have to face the lose-lose situation with the Brexit. I mean, most of the audience, I would expect, and David said it as well, see it as a lose-lose situation. So we have to really re-engage in all areas which we face similarly. It's the global problems, which are the same for the UK, for Ireland, and for Europe. We still see it as a community, and so what Germany will do is to set up fields of cooperation and revive relationships which are there already. It's not that difficult anyway. So after David said after the earthquake, he called it. we have to get the pieces together, and it's in our interest here in Germany to have good and close relations to the UK, as well as in the interest of Europe. So we hopefully can turn it into a successful story after the breakup. This would be best for the children. Let's put it like this.
Well, on that positive hope and wish and aspiration, Katja and David, I'm afraid we have actually significantly run over time, and my apologies to the many people who have submitted questions, but I'm afraid the clock was against us. But so I'm going to have to draw proceedings to a conclusion. Could I, on behalf of the hundreds of you that are watching and engaging online, extend our thanks and our appreciation to our very distinguished and outstanding panel of speakers today, to Tánaiste Leo Varadkar, TD, to Dr. Katja Leichhardt joining us from Berlin, and Sir David Lidington joining us from the UK. Really appreciate you all, your outstanding inputs, your contributions, and your willingness to engage so comprehensively and constructively with the excellent questions and topics at hand. So thank you all very much for your time. A particular thank you as well to Matthias, to Katie, and to all the team at the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, with whom we've been working very closely on over the last while to put together this event, this high-level panel. And I really hope that you, the audience, ladies and gentlemen, have enjoyed the discussion, the debate. It's left a lot of food for thought, and we look forward very much to having you join us on this journey as we follow these topics very closely. If I may as well, on my own behalf, thank you all to my very hardworking team in European Movement Ireland. A lot of work goes into these events taking place virtually, so a big thank you to them. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your interest and for your involvement. And until our next event, our joint event with CAS and DMI coming up in June, please do take care of yourselves. Slán go fóill, auf Wiedersehen. Thank you. Goodbye.